Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, thank you so much for being here. I had a lot of people registered. I think this beautiful day has talked people into being elsewhere. I'm so sorry. But I am very glad to have our guest here, and thank you all so much for being here today. It is my pleasure to introduce Nelson A. Diaz, who was the first Latino lawyer to pass the Pennsylvania bar, first Latino judge in Pennsylvania, an administrative judge, general counsel at HED in the Clinton administration, and a partner at a top 100 law firm in the state. He is a lifelong advocate for civil and human rights and a champion of economic development and housing reform. He lives in Philadelphia with his wife, Sarah Manzano. Thank you so much for being here, Nelson Diaz.
Thank you for inviting me, obviously, and it's a wonderful day to be outside and not here, so I apologize for that. I hope it was raining so we'd have a sellout crowd. But I got to meet most of you, and it's wonderful that you make the time to come out here. And I've been to this church many times, and you'll see why church is so important to me. I'm going to try to synthesize as quickly as possible some of the book and some of the stories. But the reason I wrote the book is because very few people write the history of my community. Very few people know anything about our community. And my community story is very similar to many of the Latino people who have come into this country. And many people who come even from Europe think that this is their story and not my story. And it really begins in an island which until the 1950s was probably one of the poorest places in the world. And it was mostly Taino and European, and obviously African from Africa. And there was a mixture of these three races in Puerto Rico. And so, as a result of that, most beautiful people you've ever seen in your life, come from Puerto Rico. All you have to look at me and realize that. And the nexus of this is my mother, whose father was Taino. Her mother came from a Spanish background. She had a father who was extremely forceful and not willing to really take responsibility. He had 14 children from my grandmother. She was never married my grandmother. And the children never received any love or support from this man who was 6'2", very, very beautiful skin. You've seen the Indian color in skin with jet black hair. And he rode his horses between two towns, Vega Alta, which my mother was born, and a place called Humacao, which is a place where a lot of tourists go to on the other side, which is the Caribbean side of the island. And he was sugarcane worker. And you have lift trucks today to lift the big weight stuff. Well, he was a lift truck. He was that strong of a man, he would take the 500 pounds of sugar and put it on, because sugar was the number one trade before 1950 in Puerto Rico, and probably the number one trade around the world was Puerto Rico before the deals were made with Cuba and Latin America and so forth. So in 1950, or thereabouts, there is an industrial revolution occurring in the United States. Some of you may remember that. And so there was a real need for workers, both in the farm area and in the factories. So there was a boat by the name of the Tiger Marine, the Marine Tiger, that was used in World War II to transport soldiers during the war. When the war was completed, that ship was used to transport workers, Puerto Ricanos, from the island of Puerto Rico to the mainland. Usually New York was the port of entry. In New York, my mother came in one of those ships, and it was September of 1946, and she came with a child in her belly. And that child in her belly doesn't want to take ships anymore because he gets seasick when he gets on there. But I wonder what happened to her and me as we were coming across that 5-day trip. And it's not like a luxury ship. You sit in a chair until you get here. And if you leave the chair, somebody else will take it. Or if you leave your food there or your clothing, somebody else will take it. So you have to protect yourself from that. And if you come in September, you're coming from an island where the weather is the average of 80 to 90 degrees. In September, it gets a little cooler here. So she gets here at that time. And I get born in a place called Bellevue Hospital in New York. So everybody assumes that the result of why I am such an activist and such involved is because I was born in a crazy hospital, which is Bellevue. And Bellevue is known for an insane asylum. So they assume that that's where every time I mention that, and everybody knows about Bellevue, but no, Bellevue is the #1 maternity hospital for poor people, first founded in New York in the 1800s. And it's very famous for that, it still exists. Let me go backwards to see what was transpiring, why my mother came. At 9 years old, this big 6'2" guy was coming to visit my grandmother, and my mother needed some discipline. So my grandmother gives my mother a quarter to leave before he gets there because he used to beat these kids to a pulp. And so she leaves and goes to San Juan. And she goes to San Juan and she starts working as a maid from the age of 9 years old. And as a result of that, that was the last time she had any relationship back in the town where she was born. But she has a relationship with a man who happens to be a very successful person, a businessman in Vega Alta, her hometown, who is, you own a business in a poor town, you're the king of the town. So he's the king of the town and the king of ladies. And as a result, I was conceived by that. To go further, my father I have a sister who's only 7 months younger than I am. So you can tell, you can see the picture as it relates to my father and the opportunity. You see the picture with my grandfather with 14 children. One of them died of hunger. And so that they had to fight for food. And then he had a paramour near there where my mother and the other kids would go in and steal the food, that was grown in the garden in order for them to eat and live. So they had to fight and find a way to survive. So in the United States, there were opportunities for farm labor and factories. So my mother comes here and she starts working in a factory. She starts in the Bronx, but she eventually goes into an area which is a changing community on 134th Street, before it was known as Harlem. And there were tough times for all of us. The gangs, all of you know West Side Story and heard of West Side Story because it's famous. Well, that was the typical area of West Side Story where you had the Irish gangs and the Puerto Rican gangs, and it was really tough for a guy like me, who was only 4 or 5 years old, who was abused by the gangs and also abused by members of the gangs individually. And so I thought I'd never get out. I was scared of cops. I become a judge, and I'm scared of cops when I'm 5, 6 years old. I'm scared of everything that's occurring around me. And then I get sick, pneumonia, asthma, and totally almost debilitated. As a result of that, we fortunately qualified for public housing. If you read some of the books in terms of the developments in New York, there was public housing developed all across, and a lot of people were just totally moved out, and we qualified for public housing. My wife lived in the same public housing building that I lived in. And her family, very similar to ours, was 6 members of the family. They lived in an SRO, as I did before I got to the public housing. SR, single room occupancy, and we had very little money. In my house, until I left to go to law school, no one made more than $6,000 a year income in my house throughout those years. My stepfather then was a doorman, and my mother sewed. And then she struggled and hustled for money to do anything else, whether it was to clean a house, whether it was to take care of children, whatever it was, in order to supply some opportunities for myself and my sister. Move forward to what has occurred after that. At 15 years old, in Harlem, I was playing baseball for a man called Leroy Otis, who was out of the Negro League. In those days, you had the major leagues and the other major league, which was Negro League, because they weren't incorporated yet, and Jackie Robinson hadn't started yet in terms of the integration of the major leagues. So this guy really kept me off the streets pretty much, but I'm still on the streets all the time. My mother's working, I have no guidance. I started getting involved in gangs, and this is the reason why church is so important to me. There's a group that started called Teen Challenge, and this is a group dealing with ex-drug addicts and kids in gangs. And this man who comes from Pennsylvania, a white man by the name of Dave Wilkerson, begins to work with the gangs and goes to the family court and says to the judge, "Give me the kids. Don't imprison them. Don't send them away. Give me the kids." Front page of the Daily News in New York, which is the only paper we used to read. And I then am influenced by these kids who are coming into this program, and so I decide to do something about it. Before I went into the program, I was a D student in high school. I couldn't read or write in Spanish or English, so I was illiterate in 2 languages, not only one. I entered the program. Within a year, I become an A student. Why? Because at that time, I really felt something about my soul and my life, and that God was important to me, and that God could do something with my life. And so, having that conviction, my life totally changed, and I decided that getting an education was important to me and continuing to work. So I worked since the age of 10. I had a job in order to support myself. And understanding that, even though the professors and teachers didn't give too much of a hell about me, there was one teacher at one of my high schools that because I asked questions, and he would talk about issues that related to, kids being sexually active and so forth, and I asked questions, he gave me a D in 3 courses. Just because I asked questions, instead of finding out, hey, what it is that he is looking for, what is he interested in? And so I had to work my way up. Even that, with my second year, I still graduated second in my class. I was in the commercial courses, which was a blessing, because no college would take me, even though I was second in my class. And so I went to St. John's Junior College, because I could afford it. It was $600 a semester, and I could work as a caddy and pay off my tuition. I did very well in the junior college, transferred over to the university, and was the #2 graduate in accounting and started the Honor Society at St. John's University in accounting. So accounting to me is like swimming for you or walking for you. It's just such a natural process in my life. I was ready to work for one of the major accounting firms, Anderson, and my chairman of the accounting professor says, I sent a recommendation to you for this program that just started called Clio, and they tell me you haven't applied. So I said, just to please him, I sent the application in, and that's how I got to Temple University. And became a lawyer, and became the first person of my background to be a lawyer. Temple And Pennsylvania is a place that I should not have come. I should have stayed in New York. There were only 67 African American lawyers in the state of Pennsylvania before 1972, from 1776. There were no Latino lawyers in Pennsylvania that had passed the bar. There were lawyers, but they had not passed the bar. So here is a say, I said, New York, you don't have to fight through all of that stuff. And so I decided to stay because then the president of Temple University, Peter Leoporis, a wonderful man who recruited me, said, Nelson, you got to continue what you started. I said, okay, I'll do it for 5 years. It's been 54 years and I haven't been able to get out of Philadelphia. The opportunities that I've had have come because of that spiritual nature of making sure that I understand that I can do it. And I'll work myself to do it. So throughout that process, I take an area in North Philadelphia, I revitalize it. So we talked about it in the book. I go to Washington, D.C., and become a White House fellow and work for Vice President Mondale. And I'm pinching myself, what the heck am I doing in the White House? Coming out of Harlem, I didn't know what to do in the White House. And I was able to work on legislation that impacted the community without talking to Mondale about it. I worked on the ADA legislation, which is the buses that lets you come to, and goes down. The original legislation was they were supposed to take you to the buses instead of being access to the buses for people who had disabilities. That impacted 1977. I worked on legislation on bilingual education, which was the last bilingual education bill ever passed in Congress. I worked on issues relating to employment with the commission. I mean, here he is, a kid, not knowing what the hell's going on, but I write to them and said, I'm an assistant to the vice president, please work on this legislation, and it got through. Right before Mondale died, which was last year, I went to see him, and I said, look, I think I got away with a lot of things when I was there, and I want to apologize, because, I didn't know that, I should have come through the process. He says, Nelson, you didn't get away with anything. We were watching you all the time. So you think you did. So here, trying to do what was right, having somebody on your back watching you that way. You go forward and you'll see that great opportunities that happened to me beyond working in the White House. I was able to work for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development as the general counsel, and I revitalized public housing in the country. In the country. I helped more poor people in those 4 years than throughout my whole life, and it was incredible. And those actions and relationships that I developed a program for the elderly here. I brought some other programs to Philadelphia that was able to impact upon the city and help the city with grants and activities. And so I was extremely well taken care of as long as the city got that. But then they gave me a job to reform the courts. And the courts were backlogged. So if you had a case, for example, a case relating to a car accident, it would take you 7 years for that case to get resolved. And so in 18 months, I took the job, I downsized the operation, and within 18 months, people were now going to trial. And what I did was not something very favorable to anybody. I took all my judges and made them work on criminal work. So I had 90 judges. I had 90 judges working on criminal work. Some of them who said I had never done criminal work. I said, but you're a judge of general jurisdiction. You got to do. So I had them work, and I took the best lawyers in the city of Philadelphia and made them masters as acting judges on all civil cases. And they got rid of that in 18 months without judges, because lawyers like to try cases before somebody who is renowned. And so they're not going to say, no, I'm not going to try a case before. And under the law, you didn't need a constitutional judge. In criminal cases, you need it. In civil cases, you did not need it. So we were able to do that. But after I did that, they cut my neck and threw me back into the pool, back into judges, because the judges weren't happy that I had given them incredible activities which were documented, The newspapers covered it, and some people used to hide. One of the judges was having a 3-hour lunch, and there was a Action News reporter out in front of him, and he jumped out through the back of the bathroom, and the reporter in the back cabinet says, well, where are you going? Well, I can't go back to court. You've been there 3 hours. And so to some extent, it really impacted. And so, I got all the blame for the continuation of that push at people to work in terms of that. The book then goes on to talk about other great experiences. I was in Peru, as I was mentioning to Mr. Juarez. And I did teaching in Peru, worked in Peru for a number during the Fujimori shock, which was a big, big problem in Peru because you couldn't buy a bottle of water for less than $400. I mean, everything was taking off. Inflation was increasing by 400% a day. So if you had a $20 bill, American bill, and if you didn't use it the next day, that $20 bill was worth nothing. I had the opportunity also to go down the jungle in Peru because I have a cousin who was working in the jungle with the Indians in Peru, up the Amazon, and that was a fearing experience, but the things that I've learned were incredible. I went to Russia to help Soviet Jews and dissidents, and I got arrested in Russia for 4 or 5 days, and the anniversary is that, it's May 10th. Now, when Mother's Day comes, I always remember Mother's Day because I was held during Mother's Day. The only time I ever wrote a will, put it together, say, maybe that and get back, at least somebody knows I was here. I had experiences with the Storm Maria. I worked for and on the board of the electric company. I told the governor that I would be happy to help him with an organization whose board I was on, which was Exelon, who owns Pico. And we could essentially bring about a change in the electrical system over there. Well, the governor told me, you don't understand politics. Politics to me is more important, and as a result, you've seen all of the issues up to today that they had on New Year's Eve, they had a blackout, and they had a blackout on Easter. So it always happens on great holidays that they have these blackouts. And so the system is so antiquated and so old, even though it was a great system in the 50s when it was created, that it needs so much repair. Why? Well, political corruption that occurs, which is, you give to the government and you don't put the money into the requirements of running a system. It's like anything else. If you have a wheel in your bike and if you don't put any oil in the wheel in the bike for 50 years, it's going to break and it's not going to run correctly. And that's what's happened in terms of the energy issue in Puerto Rico. I don't know how much more time I have before I got questions. Would you let me know how much more time?
Yeah, you've still got like 15 more minutes.
How much? 15? Okay, good. My mother. And I never thought that I was going to find this story about my mother. And never thought how important she was in my life until I wrote the book. And we had the chance, the first chapter is really her story. We had her for a number of years here in Chestnut Hill, living with us before she passed. And we had day-by-day stories. I told you about that 6'2" man who was tough as can be, tough as a nail. Well, my mother builds a room for that 6'2" man and takes care of him until he died, and he died of 106 years old. Took care of him until that day. Talk about the fruit of love. Talk about giving back. I'm not sure how many children, including me, who gets whipped every time he's seen, who doesn't provide for you and so forth, takes in that father and gives him a great life. And I think he went to heaven, by the way, because the guy totally changed his life. He memorized the entire books of Psalm before he passed away and can recite the whole book of Psalms, 100 and some chapters in that book. Guy learns to read, who hadn't read, learns to read and is able to function in that way. And I tell you, I am so humbled by that act of love. So that's one area that will never be somewhat reasonable for anybody to do that. Because I know when people break up with their parents, they just, hey, that's it, no more. They'll see each other, they don't talk to each other. And then my mother did the same thing for her mother. Before her mother died, one of her sisters puts her in a home. And we have, unfortunately, a culture that you're supposed to take care of your own until they die. And so she takes them out of the home. She takes her out of the home, and again, she passes away in our house. So that's the way my mother was. She takes a cousin of mine who had been messed up on drugs and provides him my room at the house that she has so that he can rehabilitate himself, and he does. And he died this year. Totally rehabilitated, totally working, got married, and lived a wonderful life. She took a kid who was born from a drug addict. And this kid today is 52 years old, living in California. He has a lot of issues in terms of health because being born a drug addict, the pains of bones and so forth and the addictions that come through as a child. And if it wasn't for my mother, that saved that kid's life. So, I never conceived all of that importance because you take everything for granted when you're sort of living and that's the way it is, but it's not. And so that really impacted my life as I'm writing this book. The second thing that impacted my life was the fact that I couldn't have done any of this if I hadn't had a community that cared about me. I was pretty crazy. I was an advocate at the law school. I create the Black Law Student Association. Now, I'm not black, right? I create the Black Law Student Association at Temple Law School. I then take over the law school, close the law school down. All of the white students support me, including the minority students. There were only 10 minority students, so the rest of them, they all support me on this. They fire the dean. Peter Leocoris becomes the dean of the law school, and today we have thousands of Latino lawyers in the city of Philadelphia. Thousands, I can't count them anymore. We have thousands of African American lawyers. We had no women lawyers. It was until 1975 that you first had a major class of women in the law school at Temple. So you talk about the whole area of Pennsylvania is a little, tough to break, but when you break it, the doors open and there's opportunities. That was one of the benefits in terms of coming to Philadelphia. The other benefit was that I was able to file many lawsuits that have impacted some of the community. For example, I filed a lawsuit for bilingual education, but that's another thing. That doesn't impact as much, but bilingual elections. So today, there are bilingual elections in 6 or 7 languages in the state of Pennsylvania. So it was really an opportunity, despite the fact that I didn't know what I was doing half the time, and I just thought that there was a need, you fulfilled the need, and I'm still doing it. I started a program for Hispanics in energy to try to open doors in the energy field. Energy is the next economy. Those of you who have children, grandchildren, energy is the next economy. Everything, whether it's a battery, whether it's gas, oil, solar, hydrogen, nuclear, all of that. I have a grandson who's studying nuclear physics up at Penn State. None of them want to come to Temple for some reason, you know, his grandfather went there, but he's up at Penn State. He had his full run scholarship at Temple. No, he goes to Penn State where I have to pay for it, you know. So he's really very wonderful with me. And so that I have begun that nationally. We've got chapters growing throughout the country. I try to do a lot in the educational field in Philadelphia. It's really tough in Philadelphia. When I ran for mayor, and I'll give you an example, Johnny Dock put together all the unions and ran his candidate, and obviously his candidate ran. Same thing happens in terms of the efforts in public education. You know, it's very hard to break. If you tell a teacher, well, can't you do some after-school activities with the kids? No, the union contract won't let me. 9 to 3, I gotta get here at 3 o'clock, otherwise there's a problem. And that's why some of the charter schools have worked well, is because they stay with the kids, they educate the kids. And so I helped start a charter also in New Jersey called LEAP. And LEAP is in Camden, New Jersey. It's tied into Rutgers University. They graduate 100% of the kids that come in there, and 100% of them go to college. Same kids that we have in North Philadelphia. So I keep thinking, you know, why can't, you know, you got to break a lot of bones to be able to get to that effort in terms of schools. So that gives you sort of a broad line of what kinds of things I've had the opportunity to do. Anyone you want me to emphasize, Sarah?
Well, I think you did a nice job, Bobby.
That's enough? Okay, so Sarah, you know, knows exactly where I'm coming from because she grew up there, she knew me, and she's been following my career ever since, and she has a good career herself. She was the director of the Women's Bureau in Washington, D.C., she was Deputy Secretary of State in Pennsylvania, and she's also now the first woman on the Gambling Commission. So don't gamble. So don't gamble. She'll tell you that. So I'll stop there and answer any questions you may have. Thank you for having me. Any questions, anyone? Yes?
Yes, well, as I shared with you, and I like to still call you Judge Diaz, but as I said, I was in a nonprofit world my whole career. Had the wonderful opportunity to engage in some of the events, activities, programs that you did make happen here in the city of Philadelphia. And I would like, if you could, to just talk a little bit more, because you said something that, you know, has been very troubling for me, because I've always been I've never been a school district of Philadelphia employee, but I ran programs through both Big Sisters and Boys and Girls Clubs of Philadelphia for many years. And, you know, when charter schools began to come into play, there was quite a bit of pushback from the teachers union. And one of the things that I did observe, because the agencies that I worked for, we did do a lot of after-school programming. And we needed at times and did use school facilities. Of course, you know, we did pay for security as well as use of the facilities. But I'd like for you to give me your insight as to why it's been such a challenge, difficulty with this whole education, because that is really going to be the difference whether we ever be able to move forward in this city.
You're absolutely
young
right.
people.
You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
The after-school programs is what saved us, and we're not running them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We had them during some periods of some administrations in the city, and you could see crime going down and education going up, because at least it's not happening today. There are no after-school programs. And so if it wasn't for a club like that, I'm on the board of Temple University, trustees for 40 years. And we talked about the fact that these kids are now running up and down the Temple campuses from once they leave school and what to do with them and so forth. It's the reason is they don't have anything to do after school is over. And if we had some pals or boys and girls or some clubs or some activities for them to go, we would have less issues with crime. We had, and if you read in the papers, you know, a bunch of 20, 30 kids this last week, they come through, they see CVS, so they pick a bag of potatoes or some crap like that, because they got nothing better else to do, and they're running through, and then somebody gets into real issue of injuries and so forth. But you're right, if we don't have at least after-school programs, that's what the charter, now, there is a problem with charter schools. They draw money away from the public schools.
Yes.
And so that's a real problem in terms of having charter schools. And the only reason some of them work is because, and it's not all of them that work, by the way, some of them work is because you're either a substitute parent, or you're a parent, or you're involved totally in that. I'll give you an example of what happens at LEAP, because it doesn't happen here. LEAP has a gym that's open for them until 10 p.m. They have a library with a tutor that's there until 7 p.m. They have a phone system that they have a question on their homework. They can call and get help on the homework. They have computers, and they're able to feel that they are something. Remember when I said I was going down the drain at 15? Once you tell a kid that he's gifted, he'll perform gifted. Once you tell a kid that God is important to him and he can change his life, that happens. What happens is, you know, we do not have the morality that once existed. As you know, the Pope just got selected. They don't know who it is yet. But in the old days, all of the public schools had a Thursday afternoon that they could go and take the public school kids to after-school church activity. You know, they would get catechism, they would get something related to that. Now, church and state obviously is an issue. But they weren't doing it in the public schools. They were just getting time out to go and do it in the institution. So we have not emphasized, and it happens also in the law, by the way. We don't have the ethics that we had years ago. So you should see lawyers how they try to kill each other in front of me in a bench. I said, look, fellas, you know, you guys went to the same law school. You guys were friends before. Why do you have to kill each other now? You know, let's sit down and talk about this. Let's be civil. It's a job. And they have to understand it as a job and not a backseat match. And so you've got to truly re-educate our individual children to understand that that's what it is, and to give them something to do. They got so much energy. I mean, you get out of school at 3 o'clock and you're going to go home and sit down? And then you have a lot of the kids who are totally wrapped up in their iPads, you know, playing the games. And then you become addicted to those games. And that, you don't become a social individual in terms of that. So we've got I'm glad I was not being born today, because we have so many issues relating to all those technical areas and AI. You know, what's going to happen when artificial intelligence takes over? All you do is got to talk to a chat pad, and we are older that don't know how to do most of that. They give you all the information you need. So they have more information than we ever had. They have ability to find more information quicker than we've ever had. They don't need to go to a library. And so they think, hey, why should I listen to you? I can get this out of an iPad or a computer. And so there's a real struggle that I see in terms of us and our children. And what they need a lot of love, and they need a lot of distance from those activities that sort of addict them to that path. So there is a work that we have to do, a lot of work that we have to do, and after school activities is one of the most important things you can do.
I would just like to add on to that, because we are the adults here. And I only hold kids so responsible because they do not vote. you do not have the economic means. It's one thing if your family has the economic ability to pay to put you in after-school programming, put you in summer camps. The reality we're seeing that in this country right now with what's taking place.
Yeah. Well, you
The
know,
average Joe Blow.
I told you, we never made more than $6,000, and there were kids who were brighter, more capable than me, who never got the opportunity because of the economic issues. But we never made it. I was just lucky that somebody took me caddying. I wouldn't make $25 a day caddying. I made more money than my stepfather made a week in 2 days. And that's the shame of it all, that economically it is very, very tough for people to make it in many of these neighborhoods. And you know, I never thought I was poor, even though we only had $6,000, because I had a house that was a project that was on a 16th floor, and I had a basketball court on the bottom, and I could play basketball and baseball. And so I thought, you know, that's all I need. But you know, I had to learn a lot of things to do. My first interview, for example, and I don't know if I talk about it in the book, my first interview for a job, luckily I learned quickly. I go to the interview, I sit down, it's on Wall Street, and the hiring partner is looking, and I see a menu, I don't know what to order. I don't. So he orders clams, you know, and so he orders the clams, and so I order the clams. He orders this, and I order that, so I figured, you know, I'll be safe. When I put that in my mouth, you know, it's starting to slip all over me. I didn't know, I had never eaten that before. I hadn't eaten anything outside, hardly any fish in my life. And I mean, I started crying, you know, because I couldn't swallow it down. Learn from that. From that day on, I ordered nothing but steaks or hamburgers, you know? And so I knew how to eat that. And so I got offers at all the jobs after that. And then you got all of those silverwares, you know, down there. Yeah. And then you don't know what to drink, if you should drink it all. And they don't prepare you for the interview. Well, now I talk to the kids, say, don't drink anything, just water. You know, eat something you know, and make sure you take the right, watch the guy, which fork he uses and which knife he uses to get the thing done. But you know, all of that is an education, because you know, that doesn't happen. You don't have 3 forks and 3 knives and spoons on your table in North Philly. So those are the kinds of things that I think help kids, that we can educate them with, and just on the interviewing technique. Sarah does all the time. If someone getting an interview, she calls them up and she tries to give them some areas that they should do some research on, they should look at, and how they should prepare for it. And it helps. But thank you for that. And now they understand why we see the kids running around all the time after 3 o'clock. There's nothing there. And we should try to push the schools or somebody to have after-school programs. And I don't know how we can do that, because you can't do it under the person structure, so maybe under a nonprofit structure that can be available. Yes, sir.
I have a question now. This weekend I was going through the ballots for the city, and I was looking at the judges. I don't know very much about this. That's why I'm thinking about, I was glad to come here today to ask you a question. And I have friends that say, go to the site of the Philadelphia lawyers, or there's a Pennsylvania lawyer, and they have really good sites on the, when I went to them to check out, describe the judges, and I'm not really good on the lawyer bit, but you have municipal ones and Superior and different. But the municipal ones, I can only find one that they would qualify, and they say vote for 3, I think. I mean, there's probably people in the room who are going to be voting in the current election, and they had a list, and they had a lot of people that applied, but they weren't fully qualified. And they apparently do a lot of research. I was reading above there where they have people that come in independently and look at all the people and try to make a fair representation. I mean, they're not trying to And to say, it just kind of scared me, what's gonna happen if there was only one person they would recommend? I mean, you got other people that are gonna be on the ballot.
You do your homework. When I ran for judge, there was an agreement between the Republicans and Democrats that no one would get on the ballot unless they were deemed qualified by the Bar Association. Okay, so there was a system at least of qualifications, and that helped. So I would never have put my name on the ballot if I wasn't deemed qualified. When I ran for judge, they only paid $35,000 a year. So I always know how to get the lowest job at the lowest pay at the right time. And so I was making more as an associate in the law firm than I got when I went to become a judge. And that was a better system than today, although there are only 13 states that have elected judges. So most states, the judges are appointed by a system that requires all of that. Since we have an election process, what happens is people who may not go through, they can still get on a ballot, because all you need is 100 signatures on each ballot, so they can get on a ballot. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're qualified. And so they get on a ballot, and what's happened throughout is that we don't have a Republican Party anymore in the state. The Republican Party is pretty much, in the city. The Republican Party in the city is pretty much destroyed. There are only about 100,000 Republicans registered in the state and the city of Philadelphia. The rest is the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party controls the selection of everything you don't know. You don't know one judge from the other unless they happen to be your friends, or they come to your church, or they're in your neighborhood. But you don't know one from the other. You have no idea. So the party pretty much has the sample ballot that they give you. 9 times out of 10, everybody on that sample ballot gets elected. So it's really a system pretty much of a party controlling who they want on the bench and how they want the bench, or whatever agreements they've made with whoever it is.
You would think there would be qualifications to
That's right.
be a judge, I don't know.
That's right. And I don't vote for anybody who is not deemed qualified. But that, they qualify yourself before you get on the ballot. And that's a real problem. So you've done your research, you're absolutely right. Now, because the pay is now equivalent to the pay of the federal court, everybody wants to be a judge. So they're paying almost $200,000 to be a judge in the Court of Common Pleas and municipal court, about $170,000. But after 10 years, you retire and you have a pension.
Wow.
And you get all your medicals. So things have changed in terms of that process, and that's why you see so many people running now for judges, and you don't know one from the other. And part of it, if you get the right number, on the ballot, the right position in the ballot, that's right. Because most people just are voting either for the DA's race or the controller's race, and then, the old days, it was easy. You just put one lever and you voted for all the people in the party, so it was easier for these guys to get elected. But it's a system where you're gonna have people there for life. So if you can get somebody that's good, you want them on there. You gotta try to get them on there because they're there for life. No one loses a retention election. No one. Only one person has lost it, and it was a person in the Supreme Court because of some issue that he voted out a pay increase for himself. So he was, that's only one, and that's in the whole history of Pennsylvania. So that's an important element of understanding. And now people spend a lot of money even running for Supreme Court and the Superior Court and some of the other elements. But you're right on the issue, but you can vote for a good judge, so that at least a good judge, good qualified person gets in. And if you don't know the others, they're gonna get elected anyway with the ballot process, so you might as well decide what you want to do with that. And I feel always responsibility for both. Yes, ma'am. You had a question? Oh, you had a question?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
You have one?
Oh, yes, she does.
I also knew this young lady, by the way, PCBC. back 40 years ago.
So,
My God.
I was gonna start with that. So, we've heard about your absolutely incredible past, and we have a 40-year past from my very first job as a Temple social work graduate. I wound up at a quasi-public agency, and Judge Diaz was on the board. It was my first job. And I just, we have so many themes going on here. We talked about the past, so I wanted to sort of bring them together and talk about maybe the future for a moment, trying to not be too partisan or political, of course, whatever you're comfortable with. But, we talked about education and after school, and of course, there's so many other components, One, the breakdown of the community, that you don't know your neighbors. Mr. and Mrs., they don't even call you Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. Everybody's the first name with the elderly person. Or, hopefully they're still Miss whatever or Mr. whatever. But they're not sitting on the porch watching the children after school necessarily, in a lot of communities. There's just not that other extra eyes on the kids, which I think is also, a sad thing. And, there's a lot of cuts and future cuts to the social support networks for children in particular. Food, basic food security, potentially health care, and, how can a kid learn in school, obviously, without those, other things. So given your extensive experience, in communities, in Philadelphia, in the country, and with the judiciary, and as a Jewish girl, I'm as encouraged by the white smoke as anybody else. It's incredibly exciting, and hopefully, we'll have another wonderful Pope. There's between the Supreme Court, and the DOJ, there's so much going on. And so, what is sort of let's have some hope and some optimism, given that we were in the past, what do you think can happen in the future?
Well, we were on PCDC for a long time, and PCDC just merged with PIDC. PCDC meant...
It's big sister.
Yeah, Philadelphia Community Development Corporation. Something like that.
Industrial development.
Right.
And PCDC was Philadelphia Commercial Development when I was there. Then
That's right.
Yeah.
And so they just merged. They merged with the last director is now a city councilman. And so they merged with PIDC, which is the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, which doesn't mean a lot to you in terms of names, but they run the Navy Yard. So they own the total Navy Yard. They've done the economic development there, and they supply assistance to, like Tasty Cake. When Tasty Cake was going to move from here, in order for them not to leave the city, they gave them and loaned them some money so they can become modern. And so now they're in the Navy Yard as well. And they were bought out eventually by a Southern company. But that's what PIDC does. And so it's an organization that's been in existence. The chairman of that was chairman for PIDC over 45 years. And he just died last year. And he was a mentor to me, a guy by the name of Walt Alessio. And Walt lived right here in Juarez is part of the Roxborough in that community. He was a great man that was responsible for a lot of developments like the rail that goes underneath the center city.
Wow. Yeah.
And when they built that, so he was the author and the writer of that during the Rizzo administration. So you can see he was and nobody knows who he is. And that's why it's so important to write the book. Because nobody knows all of the contributions that so many great Philadelphians have given to the city. One of my mentors was Charlie Bowser, who founded the Philadelphia Urban Coalition, is still in existence. and he was the first African-American to be deputy mayor. Nobody knows who he is. And so I have been living through all of that history, and I'm saying, why are Philadelphians so modest and not willing to tell their story so that other kids and their families will know that they've made contributions and they will follow their stories. So I've encouraged people to write their own stories, and at least if you don't want to do it, I'll take them and I'll put them in my collection, but share them with your family. Share something with your family, because they can then feel, man, that was my grandma, that was my grandpa, that was my mother, that was my father, what they did and what they had to go through and how they got here. Well, my story applies to many other people who have struggled to get to where they are. The foreword is written by a guy by the name of Henry Cisneros, who was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And Henry's foreword essentially says, it's the American story. That's the way he writes in terms of American story. But what I'm going through, I don't feel very American story about it. I feel like I'm struggling. But I'm trying to bring people from behind me as well, so that opportunities that I get, everybody else gets in the front or knows how to get to those opportunities. As she was talking about that, when I was at PCDC, I was running a program in North Philadelphia. I was 25 years old, and I redeveloped a North Philadelphia economic area, 179 businesses, brought one of the first Spanish restaurants to Center City before 1976, when we had the bicentennial. And we had a woman who was a flamenco dancer, and the restaurant on Chestnut Street and so forth. So I brought the first Spanish restaurant down here, and that's how people noticed me. I also got involved, and it's in the story, I got involved with Kensington. In Kensington, Puerto Rican kids couldn't go through the school system to go to Penn Treaty, because there was a dividing line right where the railroad is, where the train subway is. And so this kid is chased by a bunch of kids, and he drowns in the Delaware. So I get involved in that issue. That was the first issue. And we essentially begin to recreate structures and issues within the school system and put protections so that the kids aren't afraid to cross and get to school. But it was even that hard. And then there was a firebombing in Feltonville that killed a whole family of 7 people. I talk about that also. And that family was a Puerto Rican family moving into Feltonville, and so somehow they didn't want him. So they arrested a guy by the name of Rex Wilkinson. Rex Wilkinson was someone retarded, and there was a boy who identified him as the person who committed the crime. And I get a friend of mine by the name of Bob Matthews, who then became a judge, and Bob tells me, Nelson, God tells me you have to help me. I said, well, God tells you, then I got to help you. So I go and get involved in this case. I file a complaint and a request with the U.S. attorney, and we do our own investigation. I go talk to the district attorney, and he doesn't want to hear about it. He got a conviction already. The Rex Wilkins is already in jail. And so the FBI followed on the investigation, calls me up and says, look, we got what we think happened, but we still have that one witness that says he saw him. So can you go up with us to go see him? I said, yeah, I'll go up with you, but I got to bring one of the activists from the community in case they think I'm being a sellout. So I bring him up. As soon as we see this kid, he starts crying. So I said, look, stop here. I'll get you a lawyer. We got him a lawyer that night. He says, I fell asleep, and the police suggested that it was Rhett Wilkinson. So Rhett Wilkinson was a guy. You know who committed the crime? 3 Democratic committeemen.
Oh.
And they served 5 years each in jail as a result of the crime they committed, firebombing this individual. So, Rex Wilkinson was freed. He obviously got some money, but he could have, if I hadn't gotten involved or something like that, because I could, because it was a crime against Puerto Rican families, so, you know, I had a little credibility within the community, and that helped in terms of getting the right individuals. And so that's been sort of the process of my involvement in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia community. And I have had, gotta tell you, wonderful luck. I thank God for the opportunity. And I'm ready for my prize up there one of these days, you know, because that's my next level of gratitude. But thank you for having me. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. And I hope if you have any questions, you can get a hold of me, right? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you again, that was great. We do have copies of the book in the back. They are the Special Center on the Hill discount. That is not what you will find them for online. So if you do want to pick up a copy of the book, it's back there. Also, I have a feeling you could probably talk into the signing it if you can stick around. Thanks for being here. This is our last forum of the season. We'll see you all in September when we return. Have a great rest of your day.